One of my favorite things to do when building websites is adding small yet effective design and layout hacks that simply improve the user experience. And what better place to start than our navigation header? So come with me on a journey of self-discovery as I show you how you can easily change the style of your header as the user scrolls. This truly is super simple to do and really is a great intro to adding some custom code to your website. Hey, I'm Ryan from Hello Hudson. Thank you so much for tuning in. You know, many times you'll be looking for a specific feature for your website that may not be available in your page builder or current WordPress setup. And I'm sure your common course of action is to search for a plugin to do that specific task. And pretty much every time there will be a plugin for that. I know that one of my mates, Mick Villa, and by the way, you should go check out his channel, has even had t-shirts done up that say, there's a plugin for that. And the truth is, there will be a plugin for almost everything you want to achieve when it comes to your website. However, I'm sure, as you know, each and every plugin you add is possibly costing you money, but definitely costing you page load speed. Sometimes with good optimizations, you can fix this. But if the feature you're looking for really is only small, such as this kind of menu effect, chances are you can achieve it with a little research and some basic coding. One thing to note, there is a number of great themes out there that have settings in their customizer for adjusting navigation features and that kind of thing. So it is worth checking those out. But even so, sometimes it's just a bit of fun to get in and learn something new and hack away and see where you land. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I've achieved this, and I'm sure there are a number of ways it can be done, but nevertheless, let's take a look. So we're going to use this example again, and this is what we created in my last tutorial, and if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to go check that out after you finish this one. What we're going to do in this tutorial is fix our header to the top of the page, and then as the user scrolls, we're going to add a background color to that. We're going to remove this ordinary day text and then scale down our logo, all with a nice animation so that it's seamless and adds a nice effect to the page. So the first thing we need to do is have a look at our header template and make a few adjustments to that so that it works better with our custom code. So I'm going to go into my templates here and we're going to go edit with Elementor. As you can see here, I've got a couple of simple little elements. This is an icon, we've got a heading here, and then another icon. And we're not going to have the discussion of hamburger menus on desktop right now, at least. I know there's many differing opinions out there, but in this example, we've just got this here. Please forgive me. So let's look at our logo, and we're going to add a custom class to this, simply called logo. And then we're going to add a custom class to our text here. We'll call it logo text. So we could start our custom CSS here because what we're wanting to do is change the positioning of this section to be fixed. And we could come in here and go into custom CSS and add selector position fixed. But we're going to get a little bit of further issues happening that we would have to iron out. So instead, I'm going to show you a little trick that I use on a number of different scenarios, but for this one, it's going to work quite well. So instead of this custom code here, so what we're going to do instead is we're going to save our header as a template. We're going to call this Navbar. And then we're going to remove this layout from our template, but never fear because we're going to re-add it straight back in again in a new section, but using the template instead. And now the purpose of this is so that we can add our custom positioning using Elementor's settings. So firstly, we're going to make sure that this is a full width layout with no gap. And then we're going to find our template, lay it in here, and look for our navbar. So there we have our heading back on the page, but as a template. Now the purpose of this, as I said before, is so we can add some custom positioning. So we go down to our positioning and now we can select fixed. Now we do it this way because there is no positioning tab on sections. There's probably a good reason for that, but this is a workaround to achieve what we're looking for. So we can now update that And if we refresh our page, we'll see our fixed header that is not going anywhere. Except we do have a little white, like a 1 pixel line up here. It might not occur for you, but all I do is come into my section here and just add a couple of negative pixels on our margin, update that. And once we refresh, that line will be gone. What we wanted to do now is on our template, we're going to add a custom class to this now called Navbar and update that. And that should be our final change for within here. So the second main step is going to be adding some custom jQuery to our theme. And that custom code is simply going to be checking if the user has scrolled. And if the user has scrolled, we're simply going to add an additional class called alt to our header so that we have something to target when our page has been scrolled. So to achieve this, firstly, you're going to need a editable JavaScript file in your theme. And you can simply add that. I'd encourage you to put it in a JS folder under your child theme. And so as you can see here, I've got my child theme. We've got a folder called JS, and then under that, I've got a JavaScript file called site-child.js. So that is the file that we're going to be editing. And then you need to ensure that in your functions.php file, you have enqueued that same JavaScript file. But really all we're looking for here is this WP enqueue script, and then making sure that you are giving the relative path to your JavaScript file that is in your theme. So once we've got that, a good thing to quickly test is that JavaScript file now being called from your theme? And a really easy way to do that is simply using your console log. And so here's a little trick that I always use to ensure that my theme is calling that JavaScript file and you're not playing around with other code, realizing that it's not even actually being called yet. So what you can do is simply within our basic jQuery setup here, I'm going to simply do a console.log and then use the default hello world. So we'll save that. And then we're going to do a refresh of our page. And we're not going to see anything on the page, but if we pull up our inspector and go to console, we should see, there we go, hello world. Now that we know that our JavaScript file is being called by our theme, we can begin to add our custom code. So in our theme, we can remove this now. And as mentioned before, there's going to be a number of ways to achieve this. And if you don't like my way, that's fine. You do a Google search for sticky headers and header effects and that kind of thing that you might find what you're looking for. But really, there's some simple effects that you can add to your header that's at least going to get you started. So firstly, we're going to create a constant called navbar, and we're going to pass it our custom navbar selector. Next up, we're going to create a variable called offset. So this is simply the number of pixels from the top of the page that you want your alternate navigation to kick in. So I'm going to currently set this to 50, but you can set that to whatever you like. So next up, we're going to create a really simple function that's either going to add or remove our alt class to our navbar, depending on how far the user has scrolled from the top of the page. So to do that, we simply add function. I'm going to call this function alt navbar. Very original, I know. And in here, we're simply going to check if our window page Y offset is greater than our offset variable. We're going to add the class alt to our navbar. Alternatively, if our scroll offset is less than or equal to our offset variable, then we want to make sure that that alt class isn't there at all. So we're going to use remove class in this instance. So we can simply use an else and then navbar remove class alt. And then finally, we simply need to call this function. So to do that, we simply use window on scroll equals function, and then in there we call our alt navbar, And that's really all it is for our custom jQuery. So we're gonna save that, we're gonna reload our page and do a quick test to see if our alt class is being added or not. So back here in our theme, we're gonna refresh and then use our inspector in the browser to find the element that has Navbar in it, and then look for this alt class that should be being added to that element as the page is scrolled. So let's refresh, and then we're gonna pull up our inspector and then do a search for Navbar. Here's the element we're watching. And as we scroll, we can see that this alt class is being added and removed when back to the top. So basically, if I only scroll a little bit, it's not going to turn up because of that 50 pixels that we've added. So you can change that to be whatever you like. You might want to change that to be 0, and that's fine. You can change it to be 200, have a play, and you will find what works for your theme. But we're going to leave that like that for now. So the third and final step here is adding the magic with CSS, and that is going to be adding some nice smooth transitions. We're going to color that bar white as we scroll. We're going to remove the text ordinary day, and we're going to shrink our logo down just so that it's a little less obtrusive as we go down the page. So to do that, I would normally add this kind of custom code to my theme, but because I'm working on a live website, we also could use Elementor to add our custom code, and you can do that if you like. But instead, I'm going to use a tool called CSS Hero. And the reason for that is simply because it allows me to code my CSS in less format, LESS, and that simply just saves a lot of doubling up with our code. So I'm going to go through that technique. And if you've never heard of CSS Hero, I'll leave a link in the description below and encourage you to check it out, because it really is a great tool for CSS on the fly and has a few additional features that the CSS editor in Elementor doesn't have. So I'd encourage you to check that out. All that to say, we're going to go in and add this CSS to our page so that when that alt class is added, we can add some additional styling to our navbar. So I'm simply going to go in here to the page we're working on and go customize with CSS Hero. Now, CSS Hero has some amazing features which does allow you to actually select an element on the page and play around with everything regards to that element. So we can, change the colors of whatever. But if you're not familiar with CSS, CSS Hero really is a great tool to get in and start getting familiar with the different properties that are available to change. And not only can you do that using a visual tool, but you also get to see the actual CSS code being created below. But instead, because we already know the classes that we're targeting, I'm going to simply go into our inspector here and add our styling directly. So the very first thing we can do is add a solid color to our navbar when that alt class is added. So to do that, we simply target our navbar, and then in here, we're going to target the alt. Now, in less or SAS, this ampersand is the same as you would normally target by targeting two classes together like that. But this really is a way to eliminate double handling code. In here, I'm simply going to change our background color white for now. So as we scroll, we can see that our background color is changing to white. Now, obviously that's a bit harsh when it's just a solid change, so we want to add a transition in there. So firstly, we want to add that transition to our navbar. We're going to target all properties, 0.3 seconds, and we're going to use ease in out. And now we've already got a really nice change happening on that header. Now again, you can change those parameters you like. You can, make that faster or slower. You can change your easing, whatever you like, but this is simply just to get you started. So the next thing I want to do is on scroll, hide this ordinary day text. If you remember back to when we were adding classes, we've given this text the class logo text. So we can simply target that in here. And we're going to change the opacity to be 0. Now again, we haven't added a transition to this, so when we scroll, it's just going to disappear. So to give this a nice transition as well, we're going to simply come in here, logo text, and we're going to add that same transition here. So now we can see our text is also hiding. So the last thing I really want to do here is on scroll is simply to resize that logo so that it goes a little bit smaller on scroll. Now the target for that, if you remember, was logo. So we can do exactly the same thing here, but instead of changing the opacity or the color, we're simply going to change the font size. If that was an image, you would change possibly the width or the height of the image. But because I've simply used a icon, we're going to change the font size here. So for this, firstly, we need to know what the font size of that icon is. So we can go in and inspect that on our page. And we can come down here to our Elementor icon, and we can see that the font size of that element is 60 pixels. So I'm thinking I want to bring it down by about a third, so I'm going to bring it down to 40 pixels. So we come back over here to our CSS Hero. I'm going to add in here logo, font size is 40 pixels. We can see that's not actually currently doing anything, and that's because the selector used in Elementor will be a more specific selector, being that it's using its parent classes as well. We know that the class we added, logo, is in the outer selector of this Elementor icon. So we can be a bit more specific with our selector by using logo and then Elementor icon, and then possibly we'll still need to use the important tag in CSS to override that. So back to our CSS Hero, I'm going to add in here dot logo, but also dot Elementor icon. And then we're going to go font size is 40 pixels. And then we should see this come down in size. That is currently scaling with a nice transition, but I'm actually thinking that transition is being set through Elementor's transition. So I want to override that just in case it's slightly different to what we're doing here. We can add in here dot logo, dot Elementor icon, and we're going to copy in here our transition. Now, even though our transitioning is happening nicely here in CSS Hero, I do know that from experience that we're still actually not being specific enough with selector for that. So this is where that important tag comes in. So if I refresh our page, you can see that our icon still isn't resizing. And that's simply, if you look in here, and we can see why that is the case. So if we go in and find our icon, and you'll see our font size 60 on scroll, you can see our font size 40 coming in, but it's still being overridden by this more specific selector. So I'm simply going to add in here our important tag, which is going to override the Elementor selector. And I'm simply just going to do that in here. We're going to save and publish. And when we refresh our page, we can now see that our icon is scaling just as we're wanting it to. So that's really all it is. There's only, as we saw there, our jQuery code was, 13 lines of code, and then our custom CSS was 18 lines of code. There's very little, and then you've achieved this without having to install another plugin, and hopefully you've learned some new techniques with CSS and JavaScript. And so, as always, I'm a huge fan of ensuring that we are not limited by the tools that we have, and that we can always look outside the box to see what is available to us. So a simple Google search for something that you might have seen on another website is where it starts, and trying again, because sometimes these things can take time to learn, but really is worth your while. So I'd encourage you to keep trying new things, and let me know. I'd love to hear from you what you'd like to see in these tutorials, because I really want to be delivering content that is right where you're at. So leave a comment below and get in touch with me about what I can do to help you. That being said, that's it from me today. I really hope you've enjoyed this. And if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, please click that bell. You know what to do. And I will be seeing you in the next video. Cheers.